Hi, I'm increasingly concerned that the United States is going to attack Venezuela. Now, for the record, I'm opposed to a war with Venezuela. I actually recently wrote about this on my Substack. I put a link to that Substack essay, or whatever you want to call it, newsletter, in the description. The name I've given to this channel, Pax Americana, does imply that I'm something of an American imperialist. That's true, I am. But I don't think empires survive, let alone thrive, by doing stupid things. And I want the American empire to thrive, or at the very least survive, which requires being smart. And Shirkin's first law of military strategy is the following: don't do stupid stuff. Now, the purpose of this video is to apply some of the principles of military strategy that I've been exploring on this channel to a prospective war between the United States and Venezuela. My goal here isn't to argue pro or con, although I guess I am making a stand, but that's not really the point. But mainly what I'm interested in doing is to simply to elevate the conversation and to give you all something of a framework or things to think about to guide your own thinking about this potential conflict, or really any other potential conflict. Now, along the way, I might imply some suggestions about what the United States should do if it insisted on going to war, and perhaps also imply some suggestions about what the Venezuelans should do, although I'm not really that interested in giving them advice. My name is Michael Shirkin, and welcome to my YouTube channel, which, as you know, is Pax Americana. This is a conversation about world affairs, global conflict, military strategy, and anything else that happens to be on my mind. Now, if you like this video, please hit like and subscribe, and also if you feel so inspired, please feel free to send some money my way, either by using the thanks button here on YouTube, or maybe even becoming a member, or also you could buy me a coffee using a link in the description below. First, let's get something out of the way. I make a lot of videos about foreign militaries, and in these videos I tend to talk about orders of battle and military capabilities. I'll talk about how many tanks do they have, or what kind of tanks, or how many frigates do they have. I could do that about Venezuela, and maybe I will, but I'm not going to do that in this video. Why? Well, several reasons. First of all, let's not belabor the point. If you, just in terms of raw military capabilities, if you just look at the U.S. forces presently massed in the Caribbean and the Venezuelan military, the Americans will win. There's nothing the Venezuelans can do to stop the American military from owning Venezuela's skies and owning Venezuela's waters and bombing whatever it wants to bomb whenever it wants to bomb it. But more to the point, and this is critical, it's irrelevant. Right? This is this classic case in which the military balance of power, I don't think, really is here or there when it comes to figuring out the success of the war. It doesn't really matter. For those of you who watch my videos about military strategy, especially those dealing with my favorite military strategist, the French General André, you probably can predict what I'm going to say from here on, because there are a number of things that I end up repeating in those videos. So let's talk about these things in terms of rules for strategy. 1. The starting place for any strategy is to have a clear idea about the desired political end state, because war is not, or at least should not, be an end to itself. A country going to war must have a clear political objective that's a result of the war, and it must be able to articulate what that objective actually is. 2. Given a clear political objective, then you have to elaborate a complete total strategy for achieving that objective. Military action, the military strategy, is only going to be one component of the overall total strategy. The other parts might need to be an economic strategy, or diplomatic strategy, or political strategy, or this strategy, or that strategy. All of those things have to be attended to. All of those things have to be elaborated. And you also have to understand the proper place of the military strategy. So 3, when one crafts the military component of the total strategy, you have to think through what precisely military action can actually contribute to the whole. Maybe it can't. Maybe there's nothing the military can do that's going to make a difference. Or maybe it will. But probably, and we'll explain more about this too as we go on, what the military can do will not be sufficient in and of itself, because it has to be complemented by all of these other actions. 4, you have to mind your servitudes when crafting the military component. I'm going to explain that more in a bit. 5, there's the imperative of speed. Whatever you're going to do, militarily speaking, you got to do it fast. You want to be able to present the world and your own public with a fait accompli, ideally before anybody has time to react and muster any kind of meaningful reaction. 6, a speedy result requires preparing the ground diplomatically, psychologically, politically, etc., such that the military action, when it finally comes, is really just a brief action and guaranteed success. It's just that final thing. The thing's already like going to collapse, and the military action is just the thing that makes it fall, right? But everything else has to be prepared ahead of time. Now, as part of this also, this is 7, you have to be conscious of your strengths and weaknesses. What are the adversary's strengths and weaknesses? So in America's case, this reinforces the need for speed. Why? First of all, what is the U.S. military good at? Well, the U.S. military is really good at violence, firepower, blowing stuff up. What is it bad at? Any sustained conflict that strains the public's will. Remember, this is all about will. So, and in contrast, what is Venezuela's strength? Well, it's not firepower, right? And again, my advice to Venezuelans is don't fight, right? Disperse, pull back, survive. Its only hope against the United States is what Beaufre called the lassitude maneuver, which basically means tiring out your enemy, get it so that they're fed up or so that their public is fed up, and various forms of external maneuvers, dealing in the international community, you're dealing with the American public, various things to undermine America's will and America's ability to do what it wants to do. I'm going to say more about that in a bit. Now, the point is that the U.S. will want to achieve whatever it wants to achieve, will have to achieve whatever it wants to achieve as quickly as possible, which of course requires knowing what you want to achieve in the first place and having a very good, clear plan for actually accomplishing that. Now, also, given that what I said, how America's strength is, our superpower is blowing stuff up, you need to be able to think meaningfully about how blowing stuff up will actually contribute meaningfully to achieving one's objective, whatever that happens to be. Now, I think that often what happens, what many militaries do, including the American military, is, we'll drop a list of targets that we think are important, a military command center, depot with this, that, and the other thing, and we go and we blow it up. And we're like, yeah, we've achieved the effects, we've blown it up. But no, because remember, this all has to have the political effect. What is the political effect of blowing up these buildings? Maybe it doesn't have any, maybe it does. Ultimately, this is always about will. So does blowing up these buildings contribute to destroying the enemy's will to fight? Or what? Or does it? I'm seriously, I'm convinced that often military planners, even the Pentagon, they just don't think this through. They congratulate themselves about the number of targets that they hit. Look at the number of things we've blown up. Great. Does that help? Maybe not. I don't know. Because blowing stuff up, again, I need to stress this, is not or should not be, generally is not, an end to itself. Now, all right, now let's stop here and let's think about the conflict that seems to be in the offing. Is there a clearly defined political end state? Not as far as I'm aware. It might be removing Maduro. It might be replacing him with an opposition leader like Nobel laureate Maria Corina Machado. But Trump and his people haven't really said so. And plus, the whole thing has been muddied by lots of talk about grabbing hold of Venezuela's oil and its minerals. I mean, is that what this is about? Is this about booty? Given the vagueness of the goal, how can we assume that military action, blowing stuff up, could achieve the desired military end state? This is important. Now remember, the U.S. is, and I keep saying this, U.S. is good at blowing stuff up. Will that bring about a political end state? Will it help bringing about that political end state that we want, which we think is replacing Maduro with Machado? It would help if we knew what the desired political end state was. And even if we did, there's also a lot of historical evidence that suggests that blowing stuff up does not win wars and might not actually achieve what we want to achieve. Now, we could, of course, invade and occupy Venezuela, but I highly doubt that that's in the cards. For one thing, I do not at present see evidence that the United States is mobilizing anything like the size of a force required to actually do such a thing, to invade Venezuela properly as opposed to just like a raid and occupy it. For the sake of conversation, let's assume the objective is to replace Maduro with Machado. Can this be done at the point of a bayonet? Certainly. But also remember, what we really, really want is for anything to be settled fast. So we want to achieve this fast. And in theory, the U.S. can accomplish this through military force. So imagine how do you do it? Well, you in the opening hours, you destroy key military capabilities. You blow up some key things. And ideally also you make it so that the rest of the Venezuelan military is willing to say, okay, we're done. We don't want to die. So we're going to surrender, or we're going to just stand back. We're not going to do anything. And so people either, some people will get killed, and a lot of people, most people will basically say, fine, we're going to acquiesce to whatever you, the United States, is going to do. Also, some portions of the military might actually support U.S. intervention. Maybe most of it. Maybe. Do we know? Do we know who? Do we know what portion of the military would at least opt not to fight? Similarly, what portion of the Venezuelan public will be okay with all of this? And what portion won't be? Lots of people like Machado, that's clear, although lots of people also like Maduro. How many Venezuelans maybe dislike Maduro, but so hate the idea of this U.S. intervention that they're going to rally to Maduro anyway? We don't really know. Being brought to power also, for Machado, if we brought her to power, being brought to power by the United States might be the kiss of death for her. The U.S. absolutely has to, it needs her to be legitimate, right? And it can't just be fear. It can't just be, well, people will obey her because if not, we'll kill them. Like people have to sort of accept the idea that she's the leader. How does that actually happen? If she's just seen as the American puppet, I don't know if that's really going to work. I see no reason to believe that any of this stuff can't be done. But for this to be done, a lot of things have to be put in place beforehand so that the military part is actually fast. You have to prepare all the political stuff, all the diplomatic stuff. You have to have identified the people who are going to work with you, the people who are going to side with you. You have to make sure that when you do X, Y, and Z, that all these people are already willing and waiting to go and to do these things. And it's all kind of part of the plan. And all you need to do is execute, right? This is all theoretically possible. You also have to have exquisite intelligence to be able to pull all of this off. Does the United States have exquisite intelligence on Venezuela? Maybe. The U.S. certainly has exquisite intelligence capabilities, but intelligence collection capabilities, I should say. But also, bad things happen along the way as the information gets from the collectors to the analysts, and then it's formed into finished intelligence, and then it moves its way up the chain so that it's provided to the policymakers and the high-level bureaucrats and the people who have the PCs and the DCs, the principals committee meetings and the deputies committee meetings, and these people who either may or may not understand what they're reading or may not care because they might have their own agenda or their own ideologies or whatever. I just don't have confidence that this administration can really pull off this kind of high-level strategic thinking and planning. Also, the 2003 war demonstrated a danger that might be germane to this conflict. In 2003, U.S. leaders were convinced that certain things about Iraq were true, and that certain things about they would thus therefore assume that if we invaded, certain other things would happen. Basically, they believed that these things were true because they had been lied to by conmen like Ahmed Chalabi or ideologues who thought some things were true about Iraq because they really, really, really wanted them to be true. I'm worried that maybe the Trump administration's understanding what's going on in Venezuela and who supports whom and who's going to react to a U.S. intervention in what way might be shaped by the fact that maybe the Trump people are talking to Venezuelan Ahmed Shalabis. They're talking to a select people who are going to tell them things that they want to hear and might have ideological motives. And they're going to say things like, oh, yes, if you take out Maduro, the Venezuelan people are going to welcome you with flowers. And the officer corps is just waiting, chomping at the bit to turn their guns on the regime. All you have to do is just do this thing and give them this sign and they're ready to go. Maybe it's true, but it could also not be true. Now let's talk about the servitudes. The idea of servitudes comes from the French naval strategist Raoul Castex, Admiral Raoul Castex. Castex is one of the three great modern naval thinkers. This is the holy trinity of naval thinkers. You have the American Arthur Thayer Mann, you have the Brit Julian Corbett, and now the French Admiral Raoul Castex. The idea basically is this: you can't just have as your strategy your military strategy, meaning that you can't let pure military logic dictate how you conduct a war. So think of it one way. If you were to task some military people into figuring out how to I don't know, take over Venezuela. They would maybe take out a bunch of maps, and on these maps, maybe they're topographical maps, and then they're going to look at like, all right, what are the assets that we have, the blue assets? What are the assets that the Venezuelans have, the red assets? And then look at this and think, all right, well, we're going to have to bomb this place and invade that place and raid that place, and we're going to have to grab this mountaintop and this high country and this juncture and this bridge, and this is the sequence that we're going to do it. And all this is basically based on sort of tabula rasa, basically military requirements, military needs, military objectives. The thing is, it doesn't ever work like that. For there are things that one must do or must refrain from doing for the sake of the other components of a total strategy, such as the political or diplomatic ones. So this might mean self-imposed limits on how much force you use, what kind of force to apply. I mean, there are reasons why Trump isn't massing entire armor divisions on the borders of Venezuela. Those are policy issues, because we could, but these are policy issues. Or there might be limitations on what you can target or what you can't target. There may be compelling reasons not to seize this particular location, or maybe we should seize that particular location. Reasons that are not military in nature reasons, but rather political or economic or cultural or whatever. Venezuela's neighbors or the rest of the international community might also have concerns that might want to take on board. Maybe Brazil will say, okay, fine, we'll go along with this just as long as you do X, but not Y. Maybe Colombia will say something similar. They're going to issue red lines. Don't cross these red lines. And if you don't cross these red lines, we're going to be totally cool. Or, I mean, who knows? Maybe even France, right? France has skin in the game because of French Guiana. Maybe the French will provide support in the UN Security Council or other kinds of support, but they won't do it if we do certain things. Like, they will have limits to what they can accept and what they can't accept for their own reasons. Now, the servitudes are really no joke, and we also answer the servitudes for many reasons. Like I said, there are reasons why we don't throw all of our aircraft carriers at this, or we don't take all like PACOM, all the carriers in the Pacific and throw at Venezuela, right? Because you don't want to take away all the assets that are pointing to China. This is a policy decision. More to the point, this is why we don't gas people. This is also why we shouldn't torture people, why we should avoid or minimize harm to civilians, and why we don't just nuke everybody that we don't like, or why we don't invade countries or assassinate leaders willy-nilly just because we can and because nobody can stop us. This is why the Germans shouldn't have declared unrestricted submarine warfare in World War I, because guess what? If you limit your warfare, you might keep the Americans out of the war, but if you don't limit your warfare, then the Americans join the war, and then you're cooked, as the kids say. These are all things that you need to be mindful, because, so like maybe gassing people is the most expeditious way to achieve your military objective, but maybe gassing people also will cause harm to your country's interests that outweigh the military benefit of gassing the people, right? Or the flip side of this is that like maybe nuking Hiroshima really is the best move to make, notwithstanding the horror of murdering all those civilians in the blink of an eye. Because you can make this case. You weigh it and say, you know what, this is actually worth doing. Alternatively, there might be really good reasons to care about what the Colombians think or the Brazilians think or the French think or whatever. Either way, the servitudes have to be identified in this and considered. This is important. Castex, who talks about the servitudes at length, does not say that every servitude that you could possibly list has to be adhered to, has to be addressed. You have to at least identify them, put them on paper, and then weigh them rationally and critically. Is this important for us? Why is this important for us? And you have to think it through. But this is like an intellectual effort that, who's doing this today, right? This is an intellectual effort that military planners and civilian leadership need to be going through. Is it? Is that kind of analysis actually going on? Now, another thing that André both wrote about a lot was the idea that in the modern times, it's seldom the case that a war only concerns the two countries that are fighting each other. Because now, most of the time, most countries, the entire world at some level is involved. What does he mean by this? Well, okay, first of all, both divided the world into four categories. One, there's one's own country. That's A. He says, there's B, they're the allies with shared interests. And then there's C, the principal adversaries. And then there's E, which is the rest of the world, which, this is importantly, what the rest of the world does could actually be decisive to the outcome of the war and might even be more decisive than what happens on the battlefield, right? So, the United States entering the war in World War I had a more decisive effect on the outcome of World War I than anything that happened on the battlefield on the Western Front. The United States, in this case, though, is in a curious position in that the United States doesn't actually need any allies to do whatever it wants with Venezuela. As I said, we can bomb anything we want to bomb whenever we want to bomb it, and the Venezuelans can't do anything, and we don't need anybody's help in order to do this. However, the U.S. would benefit from a modicum of international support to ensure that the end result of the U.S. intervention has some kind of legitimacy and to make sure that it endures. Moreover, the U.S. has to make sure that E, as both said, the neutrals, at the very least stay out of it. I would be astonished if any other Latin American country would lift a finger to help Maduro, but that could change. I would be surprised if France, the United Kingdom, or anybody else would cause any problems, but they could, and that could change over time. I would also be surprised if Venezuela's allies, China and Russia, were to lift a finger to help Maduro, but they could, right? So you want to keep everybody else in line. You want to keep your allies on side. You want to keep the neutrals from doing anything. We don't need the neutrals to come to our side, but we need the neutrals to not go to the other side. So meanwhile, Venezuela, lacking meaningful military strength, cannot afford what both would call a direct strategy. It would need to rely on direct strategies and employ external maneuvers, the purpose of which will be to sap public support in the United States and abroad, and enlist outside help in one form or another. This could work, although only if Venezuela manages to drag the conflict out and deny the United States a quick decision. A fire Maduro or a senior pro-Maduro military commander, that's the strategy that I would be working on. Drag it out, internationalize the fight, mobilize sympathetic groups, and when the U.S. bombs fall and the inevitable civilian casualties occur, get the images out on social media as fast as possible. Does Maduro or his military leaders have it in them to conduct some sort of guerrilla war against the U.S. or whatever puppet the U.S. installs? I have no idea. Maybe he'll just skip out of town and accept asylum somewhere and never be heard from again. Maybe he'll just appear them from time to time on Sputnik, or maybe be caught making out with Jeremy Corbyn. Maybe he's as delusional as Saddam was and think he can go toe-to-toe with the United States. I truly hope he doesn't think like that. Now, to be clear, Maduro's life doesn't concern me. What does concern me, though, is the idea that the U.S. stands poised to kill a lot of Venezuelans, all to achieve an end that my government hasn't seen to fit to articulate and perhaps cannot because it might not even know what it is. And I'm not at all convinced that it knows what it's doing. Thank you very much. I hope you liked this video. Please stay tuned. There's plenty more in the pipeline. I believe actually the next video will be about Norway. If you look in my in the description, you're going to see links to my social media. I'm active on X and also LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and plus my own my Substack Pax Americana, also called Pax Americana, and also last but not least my website, michaelsharkin.com. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye bye.